God of gods, Lord of lords, and King of kings. There was a phrase we used in jest growing up as a teenager in Dublin. It used to be this: don't mess with the best, because the best don't mess. And these titles for God here, found in Deuteronomy, have similar implications. Listen to this. He says, "For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes." Moses records this name after God had delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. To the people hearing this first, it resonated with them that their God was stronger than all the gods of Egypt. The plagues that eventually led to Pharaoh letting Moses and his people go free. The God of God implies that the one true God is greater than all the impotent gods of Egypt. When David, for example, later on took down Goliath, the giant warrior of the Philistines, he said this: that, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And David too makes similar distinction between the living God and the Philistines' make-believe gods. Later, after Babylon had besieged Jerusalem and deported its occupants far over 1,000 miles away in captivity in Babylon, the assumption in the ancient Near East understandably was that Babylon's gods were better and stronger than the God of gods. However, Isaiah mocks the man-made idols of Babylon as the empire falls, saying this: that Bel, which is one of the Bel and Nebo, were the two of the gods of Babylon. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops low. Their idols are borne by beasts of burden. The images are carried about, are burdensome and a burden for the weary. And the idea Isaiah is picturing these gods, so-called gods, being carted on carts with donkeys and horses and then falling down and so on, and the burden that they are to the carriers. Isaiah frequently compares the process of making idols, cutting down a tree, carving its features painfully, fixing it in place so it doesn't topple over. God, in contrast, says Isaiah, is the living, the powerful God over these man-made gods who are deaf and dumb and powerless. And there's simply no comparison, says Isaiah. He is the Lord of lords. Every overlord or authority you can imagine is subservient to this Lord. Paul later in the New Testament encourages Timothy by reminding him who Jesus is. He says this in almost this explanation and afterthought, and yet he says, "God, the blessed and only ruler, the King of kings and Lord of lords," and he's referring to Jesus. And fascinatingly, John, as he writes in Revelation, links the Lord of lords with the King of kings. And he says this in chapter 17: "They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them, because he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings. And with him will be called chosen and faithful followers." You can list all the kings that earth has ever known, catalogue their kingdoms and recount their accomplishments, but they will all pale in comparison to Jesus, the King of kings. You'll often hear people cautioning others not to find themselves on the wrong side of history. Perhaps these titles of God and Jesus are cautionary in their nature too. Despite how things look in the world we live in, one day it will be clear to everybody that Jesus is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, and the King of kings. One day we're told in the scriptures that every knee will bow and acknowledge his greatness. So you can ignore it, you can defy him, you can fight against him, or pretend he's irrelevant. But one day the Bible warns this God will triumph in victory, power and glory, and it will be undeniable. The Lamb, we're told here, is the King of kings, and he's worthy because of who he is. He's God's son, and he's worthy because of what he's done. He was slain to give us life. And although the cross looks like defeat and weakness, in reality Jesus willingly conquered sin and death through strength and committed love, and then God raised Jesus to life to be seated, enthroned in heaven. And a valid question from all those things this day is: are you a follower of the God of gods, the Lord of lords, and the King of kings? Have you answered God's personal call to you? Do you sense he's chosen you even though you and I are undeserving? And are you and I faithful to his cause with God's help? If so, we'll be on his side, fighting for his honour and adoring his majesty. And I suppose the challenge is not to be caught on the wrong side of history. I'm your host, Matt Tuttleby of Bundoran Bible Reflections. Have a great week.